Welcome back. Monday, May the 1st here at Indiana Sports Beat Radio from the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios. Welcome in Kevin Sweeney from College Basketball Central. Kevin, how was your weekend, man?
It was good. No complaints. Nice to get a relatively quiet weekend in the books after the sprint of March and early April, but back to the portal Monday.
Always something going on. First of all, for Indiana, Anthony Walker. They pull in yet another piece, this one from Miami, but another front court piece. And what I would imagine is their absolute last front court piece, with two spots left to fill, either another guard or a wing and a guard, a wing and a prayer. Just kidding. But I don't know if that makes it easier to fill those spots with exactly what they need, but I was talking earlier, what they need is out there, or it may not be out there just yet. So Indiana's in no way in any kind of a panic situation. I think they're going to end up fine, actually, because by waiting now, they can probably sift through a little bit because there's going to be some fallout from the draft and guys that aren't even in the portal yet. But Anthony Walker coming over to Indiana. The one thing that I mentioned also earlier is the difference that Indiana has now is all these front court players. The one thing that they all have in common is they all have experience playing. And that is huge for Indiana because now you bring in somebody, everybody's coming in, everybody can contribute. And if they fill these other two pieces with guys like that, Indiana then becomes a team that to me is not very predictable because you're not going to know where the production is going to come from.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Walker addition just gives you another proven body, right? A guy who played in the Final Four. He's, long and can make a shot and can sit in the dunker spot. I mean, it's such a different role in the Big Ten generally, but particularly at Indiana than what it was at Miami, where they played so much small ball. He was essentially always a five. I don't really foresee, based on the roster right now, him playing a lot of five, but a guy who could potentially stretch the defense, who's older, who's played in big games, like there are worse ways to use a scholarship than that. I think oftentimes you get into a spot where, and North Carolina is a good example of this right now, where like when you sign the 8th and the 9th man first, and you're still waiting on number 3 and number 4, people get very antsy. But North Carolina did that with Paxton Wojcik and then with Jalen Withers, and then went and got Harrison Ingram and Cormac Ryan and settled everyone's nerves. I think it's a similar thing with Indiana, where obviously they got Khalil to start the offseason, but you're sitting here like, where's the wing? Where's the guard? Where's the guy who can make shots and score for us? And then you sign Walker. It's like, well, that didn't really fill a need. Like, what are we doing? And sometimes it's just kind of an order of operations thing.
Then you've got, where was I with that? Yeah, and so they're set and solid there. And last year, Indiana's offense was pretty much a two-man game with Jalen Hood-Schifino and Trace Jackson-Davis, because that was how the offense was set up. I don't know why they didn't incorporate more of the shooting aspect into the game, what that reason was. But do you think that's keeping guys from coming to the Indiana for those two spots?
I mean, I don't necessarily think so, and from the standpoint that both Jalen Hood-Schifino and Trace are gone, right? Like, if those guys are still around and you were saying, oh, we're going to give you a bigger role, it's like, well, the film doesn't lie. But at the end of the day, like, if I was a kid who wanted to go to Indiana, like, look, like, there's a lot of shots to go get. Like, there's a lot of open shot. And look, I think this team will probably play a lot of pick and roll with Xavier Johnson and with Khalil Ware, and I think there's some kind of natural fit there with Ware's athleticism, his ability to rim run, and Johnson's ability to pass the ball and put pressure on the rim, driving it. But I don't think that there's a lack of shots available, particularly on the wing, right? If you're a 2-3, there's really a good chance to not only come in and play, but come in and get shots up.
We look at Indiana's front court now. With adding Walker to that list, Malik Renew, Sparks, Ware, and now Walker look at their front court last year, how different is it? Even though Trace Jackson Davis was obviously better than any of these players, but is he better than the aggregate of having all four of these guys with Race Thompson and that? Because Indiana, that was the extent of Indiana's front court for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for having more depth. I think at the end of the day, Trace was one of the 5 to 10 best players in the sport, and I don't think there's any aggregate that can replace that necessarily. But I do think that there's certainly truth to like, hey, if we get the Khalil where we're hoping we get, which is an NBA level talent, a guy who can come in and be really productive, and then you add in, okay, he doesn't have to be on the floor for 35 minutes a game. We have a little bit more versatility at that 4 spot. Hopefully Renew makes the jump, right? Things like that. You could sit there and say, okay, we have a chance to be as good, if not better, in the front court than we were last year. And that's a rare thing to have when you're losing a guy as good as Trace.
I mentioned the 2 open spots, but also you have 2 guys on the bench already, or on the roster, Caleb Banks and CJ Gunn. A wing, shooting guard, maybe need. They both play those positions. Caleb, a great wing, CJ Gunn, a great shooting guard, need to just get better, take a step up. And I fully expect actually both of them to do that. I'm not saying that I think that these guys are going to be starters, but I think that they are going to take a step up. Caleb Banks showed his willingness and want to do that a lot last year. And CJ Gunn, I know, is a good shooter. I've seen him shoot too much. And just those guys are going to get better.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that will help without a doubt on the margins. I still think there's a clear need to get someone in there who's a little bit more proven, who can play 20 to 25 minutes in the Big Ten. But I don't think it's a disaster if Indiana doesn't get a star for one of these last 2 spots. They just get role players who know how to play, who'll contribute, who've played in big games, right? And then hope that you also get some growth internally, right? Like the best case scenario for Indiana is you get a good transfer at those positions of need, and then guys like Gunn and Banks are so good that they push them and take away those minutes, right? That's what you want. That's not only going to make your team better, but it's going to make your practices more competitive, because you're going to have guys pushing each other for spots. You're going to have a better offseason. Like, there's so much value in having competitive depth, and I think that's what Indiana hopes they'll have.
Oh, absolutely. And that goes back to what I talked about earlier in this team not being just a 2-headed snake, but being a 5-headed snake, but never knowing where that head was coming from or who it was. And that's what I think Indiana needs desperately to get to, being a much more diverse team. So you're not predictable. So you're harder to defend. And we'll see what they're able to do with that. The EYBL going on. Well, first of all, before I get to that, Mgbako, one of the big names on the list of wants for Indiana, has set a visit to Indiana for the 5th and 6th of May. That's coming up. That's this weekend, graduation weekend. But how important is that?
I mean, it's a big deal. He was, the 2023 class is not overly strong, but he's one of the higher upside guys in the class and was a top 10 recruit for a reason. I think the perception nationally is that probably St. John's, who got the first visit, and Louisville, who's getting the last visit, are probably the leaders at this point. But I don't necessarily think that's set in stone by any stretch. Kansas.
How can Louisville be in the leader for anything? It shocks me that they could get anyone at this state of his caliber at this stage. I mean, they are not going to make that kind of a jump next year.
Yeah, I think it's an investment. It's relationships. Nolan Smith was critical in recruiting Mgbako to Duke, and then he left for the Louisville staff. And I think that's something that will help Louisville there. And Louisville's I think they're probably going to struggle again. But if they get Mgbako, they'll have 3 5-stars in this class. Like plus Sky Clark, who was a former 5-star coming in, and I was pretty down on how Sky played at Illinois. Like all of a sudden you will look at this roster and it will not look that different from what people would have envisioned Louisville looking like in terms of length, athleticism, potential NBA talent. The question is it enough to actually move the needle and win? And I think there's obviously some coaching concerns now with Kenny Payne, whatever you have as year bad as they did. But we'll see with Mgbako. Like, I would temper expectations in terms of like his impact next year. Like I think he could be a starter. I don't think he's gonna like immediately come in and be an all conference player anywhere, because I think he's just still learning how to use his body to make an impact on the game. And I think he's still learning how to be consistent night in, night out. And I think you saw that in EYBL last year, where he'd show up one day and have 20 and 10, and the next day he'd be invisible, right? And I think that's something he's going to have to continue to work through in college. But without a doubt, a talented kid. And when you can get involved with a kid of that caliber, you do it, and you roll the dice with him once you get there.
The EYBL was out in Phoenix, Arizona over the weekend, and I know you couldn't make it out there, but I know you were keeping tabs on all that was happening out there.
Yeah,
which was a lot.
Yeah, it's busy. I will say, like, to me, the biggest takeaway from the first 2 weekends of EYBL is how much focus from not just media members, but also from coaches there has been on these 2025 and 2026 recruits. It was kind of known that 2023 was a down class. 2024 would start getting it back. There's some good names in there, like Trey Johnson, who's a kid from Oklahoma area. There's a kid from there's some good players. Nas Cunningham's pretty well regarded. Flory is on the EYBL or the Adidas circuit, excuse me, and he's really highly regarded. Carter Bryan, who's going to Arizona, but the depth and the talent in 25 and 26 is like positively tantalizing, whether it's Carlos Boozer's kid, whether it's Cooper Flagg, whether it's
Jalen Harrelson.
Yeah, there's just a huge list of these like awesome 25s and 26. And it seems like every weekend, people that I know and trust call me and say, I found another in one of those classes who's going to be special. So there's just like a lot of excitement around the basketball world about where things are going in the next 3 to 5 years in terms of bringing those guys up from, amateur levels into college and the pros. Now, obviously not everyone's going to develop linearly. Some guys are going to stagnate, right? I mean, there's a reason about Amani Bates was the next coming of KD and now probably isn't getting drafted. But when you have this level of promising kids, it's certainly exciting long-term for the sport.
And something else of note, the state of Indiana also has a shot to have back-to-back number one players of the year. Flory Badunga would have to take another move, but I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be surprised if he does it, because he is a game changer. The kid from Kokomo, currently ranked number 2, I think, across the aggregate. And then in 25, you've got Jalen Harrelson, who is a freak of a point guard at 6'7" and looks like an NFL linebacker or running back.
Yeah, Flory is going to continue to rise, and it's just so physically impressive. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of Oscar Tshiebwe comparisons. I think there's probably more upside as a pro than Oscar, because I think he's going to move his feet better and be a little bit more versatile defensively. But in terms of his just ability to kind of game wreck on the boards, he's going to be awesome to watch. And then it's too early probably in 25. I mean, Harrelson is a great prospect without a doubt, but there's going to be a lot of dudes, angling for that number one spot in 2025 between him and Flagg and Boozer and Isaiah Harwell, who I've seen a lot of out west, who's really, really good. Like it is going to be awesome to watch that class develop. And I think a great opportunity for college basketball to get some guys. I mean, there's been so much talk. Is college basketball getting elite talent anymore? I think part of that's just been there hasn't been a lot of elite talent to begin with. Now, if college basketball can peel off a lot of these guys in 2025, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Kevin, you're outside of not outside of the Big Ten footprint, but you spend more time outside of the Big Ten as far as coverage wise goes. Sure. How important do you see it being for Indiana to get and land a Flory Badunga and Jalen Harrelson, because they are going to be so highly rated in the state, and get back to landing those kinds of guys from within the state first, because that has to happen. And I know people go, so well, you landed Trey Jackson-Davis. Yeah, but that was more, I think, IU landing him at the time. But now the game has changed massively between when Trey Jackson-Davis was a freshman and now. And it's unbelievable to say because that's only been 5 years or whatever. But how important is that they land those guys?
Yeah, obviously it's key. It's key for national perception. It's key if you want to win in the Big Ten. It's key if you want to win nationally. Like those are the types of guys that can win you games in March. And so, well, I think it's key to at least get one, right? Like saying you're going to get two is probably it'd be great, but I don't think it's something you can necessarily expect just because of how competitive the race for both kids is going to be. But if you can land at least one of the two, I think it speaks well to your ability to recruit the state and also to get high level NBA type talent at Indiana.